In 2016, a suburban train was moving along its usual route towards Berlin when suddenly one of the passengers felt unwell. Unfortunately, it was not possible to save him, and the 37-year-old man passed away due to heart failure. Despite the sorrowful nature of his death, he died of natural causes. However, his departure from life triggered a chain of events that led to the resolution of a case that had remained a mystery for 23 years. The German town of Bad Belzig, which was simply known as Belzig until 2010, is located 70 kilometers southwest of Berlin. Today, it is home to 11,000 people. Bad Belzig is considered a historic town because it houses the medieval fortress of Eisenhart Castle, Burg Eisenhart, first mentioned in a document from the year 997, issued by Emperor Otto III, which is quite impressive. Apart from the castle, one of the main attractions of the town is the thermal complex called Steintherm, where families and groups of friends often gather on weekends for leisure and relaxation. Overall, Bad Belzig appears to be an excellent town for family living. Among the families who settled in the town was the family of Andrea Lohagen. Andrea, her sister, as well as their parents, Rosemarie and Freddie, lived on the outskirts of the city in a new residential complex. Andrea was born on January 6, 1977, and by 1993 had grown into an attractive 16-year-old girl. Andrea was in the 11th grade and eagerly awaited finishing school. As one of the top students in her class, she felt confident about her future studies at the university. She was a responsible, intelligent, serious, well-read girl, yet sociable and friendly. Everyone who knew her sincerely loved her. On Thursday, October 7, 1993, there were only 2 school days left before the holidays. Naturally, Andrea was looking forward to the upcoming vacation, shopping, parties, and meetings with friends. On that day, her parents decided to spoil their daughter and took her to a large shopping center where they bought Andrea a pair of platform shoes and Levi's jeans she had been eyeing for a while. At 6 o'clock in the evening, when they returned home, Andrea, as usual, turned on the music cassette of her favorite band, Alphaville, and began selecting what to wear with her new items. Of course, she was in high spirits. Indeed, like any teenager, she couldn't wait to show off her new outfit to her friends that same evening. And Andrea knew the ideal place to reach as large an audience as possible for this. After dinner, around 8 o'clock in the evening, Andrea called her friend to arrange a walk, but she was already in Potsdam. Pogo was the name of the local club where teenagers like to gather. As it often happens with clubs in small towns, it was conveniently located equidistant from the homes of local families, and Andrea and her friends were regular visitors. Pogo was a 15-minute walk from her home, and considering the short distance, the girl often walked instead of waiting for the bus. She hadn't learned to drive a car yet. Moreover, in a small town, she felt safe walking alone in the evening, and her parents were not afraid to let her go out alone. Besides, in the evening, the likelihood of not meeting anyone on the way was higher than encountering someone unfriendly. So, on October 7th, as always, Andrea decided to walk, first asking her parents for permission to leave for a few hours. They agreed, asking her to return no later than 10 o'clock. Andrea agreed without argument and left home at 8 o'clock in the evening. That evening, as always when their daughter left home, her parents stayed awake, expecting Andrea. But when the clock struck 10 in the evening, the girl hadn't returned home. At first, the parents thought she was caught up socializing with friends and either forgot about the time or didn't manage to leave the club on time. They waited a little longer, constantly peeking out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of their daughter. An hour passed, then a second, but it grew later, and Rosemarie and Freddie became increasingly worried. What troubled them particularly was that Andrea was one of the best students in her class, which meant she knew she had to go to school the next day. Therefore, it seemed unlikely for her to intentionally stay out late. It was completely out of character for her because she was a very responsible girl who always came home on time and listened to her parents. Complicating matters was the fact that in 1993, teenagers didn't have mobile phones. Andrea couldn't write or call her parents if she was delayed, and they couldn't find out her whereabouts. By 12:30, unable to contain their worry, the parents began calling her friends, hoping that perhaps she stayed the night at one of their places, as they were closer. But of course, that wasn't the case. No one knew where she was. At 1 o'clock in the morning, driven mad by worry, her father Freddie decided to look for her himself. He drove several times along the road she should have taken to the club, went through other, more remote streets, but he couldn't find his daughter. Shortly before 4 o'clock in the morning, He went to the police station and reported his daughter missing. He probably hoped that the police would act immediately because several hours had passed since she was supposed to return home, but he was mistaken. Officers believed it was too early to take any action. Although this was extremely upsetting and disappointing for the girl's parents, those were the rules. The police often receive reports of missing persons, especially when it involves a teenager, and they prefer to wait a day before taking action because teenagers usually return on their own the next morning. On the other hand, how many reports of missing teenagers could the police get in a town of 11,000 people? Besides, Andrea wasn't a problematic teenager. She had no reason to run away, no conflicts at home or with friends. Andrea was a happy girl who had just returned from shopping. The holidays were near, and she was allowed to hang out and enjoy her youth with friends. Her parents were convinced that Andrea wouldn't have run away, but the fact remained. For Rosemarie and Freddie, this must have been a real nightmare. Sitting at home, unable to rest, fearing for their daughter's life, constantly imagining scenarios of what might have happened to her, knowing that nobody was even looking for her. On the following day, January 8th, Andrea's mother, Rosemarie, also attempted to search for her daughter independently. It's understandable that waiting for the police to take action might have been a real torment. She walked through the town center and along the path Andrea was supposed to take. About 100 meters from the Pogo Club, she noticed a wooded area. Interestingly, this plot belonged to the grandfather of Andrea's former boyfriend, a boy a little older than her, from whom she had parted ways just a few weeks before her disappearance. While exploring this area, the girl's mother stumbled upon a hut where she found a mattress and a hand towel lying around. At that moment, surrounded by trees and hearing only the barking of dogs, she suddenly felt very uncomfortable, almost physically sensing that something was amiss. Suspicion crept into her mind that Andrea's former boyfriend might have something to do with her disappearance, and she would continue to believe this for a long time. Convinced that detectives should inspect this area, she reported it to the police, but once again, they did nothing. They explained that they didn't see any reason or concrete evidence to investigate this territory. It was unclear where the evidence could have come from if they hadn't started their work yet. Perhaps they should have looked for clues in the hut. Nevertheless, they clarified to Rosemarie that they didn't have a warrant, meaning they couldn't legally go there. Only a week after the teenager's disappearance did the police finally begin their work. Law enforcement checked hospitals and transportation, leaving Bag-Belzig, the place where Andrea could have departed from. Helicopters flew over the forests of the town for several days, while ground search teams, including dog handlers, scoured the area. Dog handlers searched the route between the girl's home and Pogo and examined the surrounding areas. To precisely establish Andrea's last actions, detectives interviewed all possible witnesses, everyone present at Pogo on that evening. However, it proved quite challenging, as the police had waited for an entire week and teenagers frequented Pogo every day. They were now confused about the specific day and couldn't accurately confirm if they had seen Andrea at the club on October 7th. Fortunately, after speaking with 21-year-old Yvonne Eshkin, a club employee, they were able to confirm that Andrea was there on the 7th. Yvonne remembered seeing Andrea standing outside the club. While she couldn't recall the exact time, it was definitely before 10 p.m. because Pogo closes at 10 p.m. Other witnesses remembered seeing Andrea walking along a dark road towards the club. Another witness reported seeing her talking to two boys. The police questioned 13-year-old Robin and 14-year-old David, who confirmed exchanging a few words with Andrea as she was returning from the club, after which she went home while the boys went in the opposite direction. The police began to suspect that Andrea might have taken an isolated narrow path that would have been plunged into complete darkness at that late hour. The locals referred to this path as the Lover's Path, located between the homes of two families, which would have allowed the girl to reach home much faster than the main road. However, the police could never confirm whether she indeed took the Lover's Path because neither the canine units nor the forensic experts found any evidence supporting this theory. Nonetheless, this secret path was often used by teenagers returning from the club. To attract more attention to the case, Andrea's photo was shown on television, and a reward of 10,000 marks was offered for information that could help find her. The police asked anyone who could assist them in bringing the girl back home safely to contact them. They received over 250 reports stating that Andrea Lohagen had been seen in various countries around the world: Turkey, Greece, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Spain. However, Despite the police's efforts to investigate each lead, none of them led to any breakthroughs. Eventually, the police admitted defeat, as they had nothing to work with, and the investigation came to a standstill. The case remained unsolved, and Andrea Lohagen was no longer sought after by anyone other than her family. 7 years later, on July 9, 2000, a local resident was enjoying her morning coffee on a beautiful day when she saw Josie, her landlord's dog, joyfully playing with something resembling a soccer ball. However, upon closer inspection, the woman realized that it wasn't a ball but a human skull. She hurriedly called the police. Soon, Frank Friedrich, the woman's landlord, arrived. Unexpectedly, he claimed that he had already seen the skull, took it from the dog, and hid it before leaving to celebrate his parents' birthday. Upon returning home to address the matter, the police were already there. The man explained his peculiar behavior by stating that he knew that during World War II, prisoners of war were held in that area, so he assumed the skull was quite old. Therefore, he hid it, intending to deal with it later. When the police inspected the area where the skull, presumably that of Andrea, was found by the dog, it turned out to be the very same location warned about by Andrea's mother, just 10 meters behind the lover's path and 100 meters from Pogo. Inside a long-abandoned cabin, behind a weathered door simply leaning against the wall, the police found the rest of the skeleton. Thus, if the killer attempted to hide the body, they hadn't put in much effort. Surprisingly, despite the police searching this location with sniffer dogs in 1993, nobody noticed or smelled anything. Journalists, reporters, the landlord's dogs, construction workers, and local residents had visited the site, all departing with the same outcome. Naturally, the locals, convinced the remains belonged to Andrea, were furious at how the police handled the investigation. The police defended their actions, stating they had investigated the area only a week after the girl's disappearance. Supposedly, they had acted very promptly since the police are obligated to search for a missing person, only if there are suspicions of a crime or several weeks after the disappearance. Regardless, the remains were sent to a laboratory, confirming they indeed belonged to Andrea. DNA comparison was unnecessary as the victim's dental records matched the teeth in the skull. Although the girl's remains were found, the forensic expert couldn't determine how she was killed or what happened before her death, as only the skeleton remained. However, he noted a head injury on the skull. Notably, Andrea was found not where the murder occurred. Her clothing wasn't found in the cabin. Even her watch and favorite ring were missing. To this day, it remains unknown whether this implies the victim was assaulted, causing her clothes to be removed, or if they were taken to conceal evidence. If the latter is true, the perpetrator's actions seem senseless because the body wasn't even hidden. With the discovery of the remains, the case was reopened, but it was now a murder investigation for Andrea Lohagen. At this point, both the police and the townspeople questioned what the motive for the murder could have been. They were especially troubled by the fact that the lover's path, near where the body was found, was only known to a limited number of locals, suggesting the killer lived in Bad Belzig and possibly was still among them. However, despite this breakthrough and a reward of 5,000 euros for any information, the police still lacked substantial leads, leaving the case unsolved for many years. Everything changed in the summer of 2016 when an unknown woman called the police, claiming she precisely knew who killed Andrea Lohagen, her friend, 37-year-old David. He was one of the two boys who had met Andrea on her way from Pogo. At the time of Andrea's disappearance, David was 14 years old. As an adult, David was a loner who enjoyed solitude, struggled to hold a job due to alcohol and substance abuse issues, and this lifestyle undoubtedly led to health problems. The woman who called the police explained that the reason she decided to share this information was that David had died in the same year, 2016. He was on a train to Berlin when he suddenly fell ill and passed away due to natural causes. It is unknown how long this woman had been holding on to this information. David left no other confessions. The only evidence hinting at his guilty conscience was a dark post on a social media platform. In the photo, a man wearing a shirt with the inscription "Wanted" is seen holding a small child. Underneath the image, he wrote, "You can do the right thing 1,000 times, but make one mistake and you're worthless." The police tried to learn from David's mother what she knew about the matter, perhaps if her son had confessed to her about the crime. However, she was reluctant to speak with the officers. After all, she still lived in the same town where Andrea went missing and where her family resided. Eventually, she admitted that her son had told her they and a friend had planned to rob Andrea, but everything went wrong, and Andrea was killed. That was all she knew. The woman who called the police added that at the time of David's murder, he wasn't alone. He was with his then 13-year-old friend, Robin. In 2016, 36-year-old Robin lived in Tyrol, Austria, with his wife and 2 children, worked on a dairy farm, was very quiet, friendly, and spent evenings at home. He was so secretive that his colleagues only learned about his wedding after he decided to change his surname following the marriage. Robin was questioned on October 27, 2016, but since he was 13 years old at the time of the crime, he was questioned only as a witness, not a suspect. Law enforcement couldn't imprison him, even if he confessed to the crime, as he was below the age of criminal responsibility at 13. Of course, this doesn't seem right. If you understand how to take someone's life, you should be punished in some way. During the conversation, Robin didn't deny David's involvement in the crime, but asked for the opportunity to discuss his own participation after speaking with his family. He was allowed to go home and was given a new date to return to the station for further questioning. However, police soon realized that Robin's desire to talk to his family wasn't the real reason for refusing to speak with them. It was merely an excuse to leave the station. Indeed, just a few hours after returning home, he left again. But before that, he left a farewell note for his wife. He put on hiking boots, got into the car, and headed towards Pendling Mountain, located approximately 15 kilometers from his home. There, he climbed the mountain and jumped from it. 4 days later, on November 4th, his body was found by a hunter. In the note to his wife, he didn't explain anything, just bid farewell. The police chief later mentioned that when the detectives spoke with Robin, they explained to him that he wouldn't face any problems, no prison sentence. They just wanted to know why he did it. They wanted Andrea's parents to get answers to the questions that had tormented them for so many years. But Robin decided otherwise. It was undoubtedly difficult for Andrea's parents to come to terms with his departure. With his departure, their last chance to find out the motive behind the murder disappeared. What happened just before Andrea's death and how exactly she died. Why they removed her clothes and how long the girl remained alive. Also, where exactly everything happened. However, it's very interesting that the plot where the cabin was located belonged not only to Andrea's former boyfriend, but also to one of the boys' grandfathers. This is because Andrea's ex-boyfriend and Robin were cousins. David and Robin were troublesome teenagers well known throughout the town. They were often seen smoking or drinking alcohol. Soon they embarked on a series of burglaries, after which they served time in juvenile detention. So, it couldn't be said that they were kids whom no one could suspect of anything. But murder is something much more significant than breaking into someone's house and stealing valuable items. Detectives spoke with the boys soon after they, as later revealed, killed Andrea. At that time, they were not suspected of anything. They were just witnesses. But one can't help but wonder, if you're 13 or 14 years old and you've just committed murder, how composed will you be when the police come questioning you? The detective who interacted with them in 1993 recalls that they were calm and rational. However, they asked various strange questions, like what it's like to be in juvenile detention as a murderer. Additionally, when the detective went to one of the boys' homes, he saw a cassette with inappropriate films on the table. Moreover, when he asked each of the boys to clarify where they met Andrea and which road they took afterward, their statements differed. Nevertheless, the oddities in the boys' behavior and the discrepancies in their statements were not sufficient to accuse them of anything. Certainly, there are many cases where investigators did not hesitate to pressure teenagers and interrogate them for hours on end in pursuit of a confession, but not in this case. Perhaps the police didn't want to interrogate and pressure David and Robin for long, considering their age. Although the police officially closed the case, Andrea's parents are not convinced. They suspect that a third person was involved in the murder. Freddie, the girl's father, couldn't believe that 2 young boys committed such a heinous crime without the help, guidance, or at least the influence of an adult or someone older than them. Rosemary and Freddie are convinced that they had assistance. Andrea's mother's intuition has proven right before. What if her intuition isn't wrong this time? It was a completely senseless and cruel murder. And even before the killer's death, they did not alleviate the suffering of the victim's parents. Shortly before Andrea's death, she wrote an essay titled The Tale of Happiness. Andrea narrated an encounter with an old man who told her, "I worry about you because you seem so sad." He promised to grant her 3 wishes. The first was a journey at 16, and the second was a happy future. Andrea, being prudent, didn't want to waste the 3rd wish, explaining, "Who knows what will come after, as I am already happy." However pitiful an existence the killers might lead, even if they remembered the crime they committed every day, they could move on. But for Andrea, who loved life so much, hers was taken away. At one time, James Baudouin came into the world in March 1991 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He was the eldest son of a single mother, struggling to make ends meet. Seeking to escape the echoes of his past, he was reborn a 2nd time in New York at the age of 22. Among the many promises New York holds, the primary one remains the chance to turn fiction into truth and become the person one dreams to be. Unexpectedly, even to himself, he found himself the son of a millionaire, delving into all the pleasures afforded by his new family and societal status. Luxurious apartments in Manhattan, poolside soirees in the respectable Hampton suburb, top-tier cars and suits from renowned designers. The young man gained much, but much was also expected of him in return. His dizzying ascent demanded safeguarding his reputation and steering clear of troubles. The evening of November 12, 2016, began like any other Saturday evening for 26-year-old Joey Comunale. Joey, from Stamford, Connecticut, was an attractive, friendly, athletic guy who worked for his father in the multi-million-dollar security business empire he had built. The young man enjoyed life to the fullest, including regular trips with friends to the finest establishments in New York. So that Saturday, he didn't miss the opportunity to unwind at one of Manhattan's most popular clubs, Gilded Lily. A little after 3 a.m., clubgoers spilled onto the street, chatting cheerfully as they awaited taxis. Joey's friends noticed several girls who couldn't take their eyes off him. Girls often paid attention to the handsome young man, and this evening was no exception. Being a very sociable guy, he struck up a conversation with them, and later 2 more strangers joined the group. At one point, one of Joey's friends borrowed his phone, turned away to make a call, and when he turned back, Joey was no longer there. He was already getting into a taxi with the girls and 2 other guys. His friends decided to return the phone to him later and went back to Connecticut. They were confident that Joey had been invited to continue the night elsewhere and that everything would be fine with him. As it turned out, Joey's new acquaintances were 28-year-old Lawrence DeLeon and 29-year-old Max Gemma, old friends and apartment neighbors in Jersey City. Both grew up in very affluent families, especially Max. His father was a former mayor of Oceanport, New Jersey, and had business dealings with Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law. Max himself sold computer software. Larry's family bred racehorses and was involved in real estate, a business Larry was drawn into as well. Joey's friends were not wrong. Lawrence DeLeon invited the whole group to his friend's apartment in Sutton Place, Manhattan. Sutton Place is like a tiny enclave accessible only to people with a lot of money, and if you were invited there, you'd definitely want to go. Naturally, Joey and the 3 girls agreed, but during the trip, one of them, suddenly realizing she was heading to a party with strangers, devised a safety measure for herself and her friends. She took a photo of Larry and sent it along with his name to her friends, just in case they needed to find her. Although the photo was a precautionary measure, it was taken more as a joke. None of the girls felt in any danger. Joey wasn't worried at all. He was a strong, athletic guy, and also very friendly, with no reason to think that anything would go wrong. The lively group arrived at the house a little after 4 a.m. A door was opened by an attractive young man in jeans and without a shirt. He introduced himself as James Rackover. Jimmy was friendly, amiable, and somewhat boastful, mentioning his father several times, a renowned jeweler named Jeffrey Rackover, whose clients included Oprah Winfrey, Jennifer Lopez, and Donald Trump. Jimmy lived in a more modest 40th floor apartment despite his father's residence being on the 32nd floor. The young people had a great time, enjoying themselves and taking videos of each other. A harbinger of something ominous was Larry's pocket knife, which he constantly fidgeted with, using it to open beer bottles. A sign of impending danger could have been Larry DeLeon swinging around a pocket knife. However, something terrible happened later that night because Joey did not leave there alive. Joey Comunale grew up in a very close-knit family, particularly bonded with his father, Pat Comunale. When his son didn't return home that night, Pat wasn't immediately concerned as Joey had gone to the club and was expected back later. However, Sunday arrived and Joey was still missing. He hadn't responded to his father's messages, which was unheard of. So, Pat called his son's friend, who explained that he accidentally kept Joey's phone. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but Joey's relatives and friends immediately took action. His friends scoured social media for any traces of him. Using Instagram's location feature, they searched for photos from the club posted on Saturday evening and early Sunday morning. They found a picture of someone familiar with a girl getting into a taxi with Joey. His friends asked for her phone number and called her. She recounted that they had a great time at the party in Sutton Place, and after that, Larry and Joey escorted her and other girls to an Uber. Joey waved goodbye, seemingly planning to return to the apartment with Larry. However, when they contacted Larry, he claimed he hadn't seen Joey after they left the girls at the taxi. He added one detail that immediately raised doubt in his words. The last time he saw Joey, supposedly, Joey said he was going to buy cigarettes. This was unusual for Joey because he sometimes smoked, but never bought cigarettes. Suspecting deception, early in the morning, Pat went to the New York Police Department. The New York police detective took the father's concern seriously and suggested they go together to Sutton Place and check the surveillance camera footage. They saw that at 6:44 a.m., Joey and Larry escorted the girls to the car and then went back into the building. Joey didn't exit the building after that. At this point, Pat felt uneasy and, citing the need to make a call, stepped outside. There, he noticed a building worker starting to collect garbage. Pat rushed back to the detective and asked to stop the trash collection. He was convinced that there might be some crucial evidence in it. And he was right. In the trash bags, the police found Joey's blood-stained pants, his shirt, and his ID, along with a necklace gifted by his father, which he never took off. At that moment, Pat had no doubt that his son didn't leave the building alive. On other surveillance camera recordings, detectives observed Jimmy wheeling out 2 suitcases from the building. And 14 hours after Joey returned to the building, Jimmy Rackover and Larry DeLeone departed in Jimmy's father's Mercedes, heading south towards New Jersey. However, the police couldn't determine where the car had stopped. Later, blood was discovered in Jimmy's apartment, in the car, and even on the luggage cart by forensic experts. Detectives suspected Jimmy borrowed his father's Mercedes to transport the body. However, there wasn't enough evidence to press charges. The police desperately needed one of the young individuals to start talking, and soon they got lucky. Assuring Larry that they didn't consider him a murderer, the investigators persuaded him to reveal who killed Joey. Larry fell for this trick. Here is what he told about that fatal evening. The evening was going beautifully. Everyone was having fun, and there was absolutely no aggression, especially towards Joey. When dawn arrived, the girls decided it was time for them to go home, and Joey and Larry escorted them to the car. Then the two of them returned. We probably will never know what exactly happened next. One thing that all stories agree on is that Max was sleeping on the couch at that time, and he had nothing to do with the crime. According to Larry's words, Joey made an offensive comment, essentially calling him a freeloader. Larry, known for his aggressive nature, couldn't tolerate this and attacked Joey. Joey had drunk too much and couldn't defend himself, but Larry continued to brutally beat him, even after he fell unconscious. However, despite starting the fight, Larry claimed that Joey's killer was Jimmy Rackover. Allegedly, when he saw how badly Joey was beaten, he declared that they needed to get rid of him permanently to protect themselves from potential trouble. They asked Max to leave so he wouldn't have to be involved in what would happen next. Larry and Jimmy moved the guy into the bathroom, placed him in the bathtub, where Jimmy stabbed him. Then Jimmy attempted to dismember the body with a bread knife, but it turned out to be not that easy. So they abandoned this plan and began cleaning the apartment with bleach and paper towels. Throughout the afternoon, they discussed how to dispose of the body and devised a plan. A crazy and evil plan. Waiting for darkness, Jimmy called the building staff, asking for a luggage cart. Larry wrapped the body in a blanket and threw it out of the window from the 4th floor. Jimmy borrowed his father's car, loaded suitcases onto the luggage cart, placed them in the trunk, then drove to the body. The accomplices put the body in a suitcase, loaded it into the trunk, and drove away. Larry recounted that they arrived in Oceanport, New Jersey, the town where he grew up. The guys put the body in a shallow pit behind the flower shop, where there were no surveillance cameras. Then they doused Joey with gasoline and set him on fire. After Larry confessed to where they left the body, the police found the remains. Joey was not previously acquainted with the guys, had no relation to any of them, and the accomplices hoped this would buy them enough time. If they could get rid of the body before it was searched for, they would escape the police. But with the dawn, calls and messages from Joey's friends and relatives, as well as the police, began appearing on their phones. The search began. The worst part is that when Pat Comunale called Larry and heard that his son had gone out for cigarettes, Joey was actually lying in the bathroom just a few steps away from him. Jimmy Rackover, upon hearing Larry's confession, vehemently denied his version of events. According to him, he had left the apartment for a few minutes, and when he returned, Joey was already dead, and he had to deal with the consequences of his friend's aggressive actions. Moreover, Larry's words were highly contradictory. First, Jimmy allegedly demanded that all the guys change into clean clothes. Larry stated that when he persuaded Max to go to the bedroom to change, he turned around and saw a knife sticking out of Joey's head. However, no knife wound was found on the victim's head during the autopsy. Then Larry said that Joey was dead when they dragged him into the bathroom, but later corrected his statement, claiming that Jimmy stabbed him and got angry when he couldn't dismember him. This again contradicts the findings of the pathologist, who stated that Joey was killed by 15 stab wounds in the chest. Jimmy, Larry, and Max were arrested. Despite Larry's testimony, all three refused to admit their guilt, even Larry himself, claiming that the police ignored his request to have a lawyer present. Larry and Max were released on bail, while Jimmy had to await the case's hearing in jail because he couldn't post bail. However, the investigators were in for the biggest surprise because it turned out that Jimmy Rackover, who led such a fabulous lifestyle, was not who he claimed to be. To everyone, Jimmy was the son of a millionaire living in a prestigious neighborhood. But in reality, he was a former fraudster from Florida named Jimmy Baudouin. Even as a teenager, Jimmy had a history of trespassing, robbery, and even once, while under house arrest, removed an ankle bracelet to enjoy a month of freedom. Despite the list of offenses, his close ones claim that Jimmy wasn't the person he was portrayed to be. He always helped others, and there's still a dog at his mother's house that he rescued. They argue that Jimmy had a stroke of bad luck because he grew up without a father and started associating with the wrong crowd. Jimmy agreed with this because after serving 2 years in prison for robbery, the young man decided it was time to put an end to that life and moved far away from old friends to New York. His path to success was no different from hundreds of other young people. He worked as a bartender, a DJ, a consultant at Ralph Lauren, and even tried to earn extra money as a model. 3 months after moving to New York, he met Jeffrey Rackover at a gym. The middle-aged single millionaire took him under his wing. He dreamt of someone caring for him at the end of his life, dreamt of a son. Since the guy was already an adult, Jeffrey couldn't adopt him but allowed Jimmy to take his family name. To ward off potential rumors and scrutiny, Jeffrey told his friends a sentimental story about a young man who showed up at his door one fine day, claiming they weren't acquainted, but that he was his son. Jeffrey helped his son get an education and a job as an insurance broker specializing in jewels and art objects. Eventually, Jeffrey helped Jimmy settle in Sutton Place. Thus, Jimmy Baudouin from Florida, a small-time fraudster who decided to drastically change his fate, became James Rackover, the son and heir to the multi-million-dollar estate of a famous jeweler. The trial of Jimmy began on October 15, 2018. The prosecutor attempted to prove that it was Jimmy who inflicted the fatal stab wounds on Joey. However, their case appeared very weak. The difficulty for the prosecution was understandable. The two main suspects were shifting blame onto each other, and there wasn't a clear answer as to who actually committed the murder. The crime occurred in Jimmy's apartment, but there was a lot more blood found on Larry's clothing. Additionally, it was Larry who was seen brandishing a knife at the party, not Jimmy. Finding a motive was even more challenging because nobody believed Larry's claims about Joey's rudeness. At one point, the prosecution stated there might not have been a motive at all, but later, realizing that a motive would sway the jurors in their favor, the prosecutor devised a scenario where the guys might have argued over illegal substances. The prosecution called in 3 girls who were hanging out with the guys that evening. However, their testimonies were more in favor of Jimmy because all of them unanimously stated that the guys behaved in a friendly and amiable manner, more like brothers than friends. They complimented each other's physical fitness and even engaged in a playful competition at one point, dancing to music from the movie Magic Mike. The girls joyfully recorded the party on video and these recordings completely confirmed that there was no display of aggression, especially towards Joey. Overall, the trial seemed to rely more on critiquing Jimmy's lavish lifestyle than on determining what actually happened. After a week of deliberation, there was no direct indication that Jimmy was the killer. The prosecutors needed something or someone else. Suddenly, they had their key witness. Louis L.J. Ruggiero, a 24-year-old, took the witness stand. Louis was the son of the host of a news program and a close friend of Jimmy's father, Rosanna Scotto. Following in their famous parents' footsteps, Louis and Jimmy quickly became friends. Now, Louis claimed that Jimmy confessed the murder to him. He called Jimmy when the police were still reviewing surveillance footage. Jimmy needed to talk. According to Louis, Jimmy confessed to slashing Joey's throat and then stabbing him multiple times. Jimmy even asked Louis if he wanted to hear the most gruesome part of the story. After they and Larry disposed of the body, Jimmy returned home, ordered pancakes, and calmly ate, as if nothing had happened. Initially, Louis didn't believe Jimmy, but after noticing police near his apartment, he began to consider that maybe Jimmy was telling the truth. Louis's testimony strongly impressed the jurors, especially his vivid description of how Jimmy allegedly slashed Joey's throat. However, the problem arose when there were no knife wounds found on Joey's throat. Furthermore, before the trial, while speaking with prosecutors, Louis stated that Jimmy broke Joey's neck. Yet during the trial, he claimed there was a cut on Joey's throat. Then, suddenly during the trial, he mentioned the knife stabs. Intentionally or not, Louis's statements changed to fit the facts. Additionally, recently, Jimmy and Louis had a falling out. Louis even claimed that Jimmy extorted money from him. It becomes entirely unclear why Jimmy would confess to Louis about the murder, essentially placing his fate in the hands of someone who despised him. Not to mention, upon hearing this confession and knowing that an investigation was ongoing, Louis didn't even think to call the police. Instead, he called his mother and a lawyer. In turn, Jimmy's attorneys insisted that their client didn't commit the murder but helped conceal it. Jimmy never denied this. The overwhelming evidence left him no choice. Jimmy's lawyers pointed the jury to a large dent in a ring that Larry was wearing that night. There was no dent in the ring while they were at the club, and it likely resulted from Larry repeatedly hitting Joey in the face. Such powerful blows could have been fatal. The lawyers also highlighted Larry's pocket knife. Could it have been used to inflict wounds? It was due to Larry's aggressive nature that Jimmy, the apartment owner, had to deal with the consequences. These consequences poorly aligned with both Jimmy's and Larry's versions. A natural question arose. Why would someone go to such lengths to cover up someone else's crime? The defense's answer was that Jimmy feared losing his luxurious lifestyle. While prosecutors used his lifestyle to tarnish him in the eyes of the jury, the defense used it to explain his innocence. After all, if a dead body had been found in his apartment, it would have put an end to his warm relationship with Jeffrey Rackover. Finally, the defense had another ace up their sleeve. Surveillance cameras captured 4 crucial minutes when James exited the apartment, precisely when the altercation might have started. The video clearly showed him heading towards Jeffrey's safe for illegal substances, but not finding any. This was corroborated by the camera inside the jeweler's apartment. At that time, Jeffrey Rackover was peacefully sleeping in his bed, trusting his adoptive son completely. It seemed like the defense arguments were enough to sow seeds of doubt in the minds of the jurors. However, Louis's testimony decided the outcome of the case, which otherwise relied solely on circumstantial evidence. Jimmy was found guilty on all counts of the charges. For second-degree murder, he was sentenced to a prison term ranging from 28 years to life. A month later, Larry Dillon unexpectedly pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in exchange for a 23-year prison sentence, although he filed an appeal after the verdict. Max was sentenced to 6 months in prison for obstructing justice. He served 4 months and was released in August 2019. Jimmy Baudouin got a second chance in life when he made the most correct decision of leaving his criminal past behind and moving to New York. He was fortunate again when he met Jeffrey Rackover, who called him his son and generously endowed him with his affection and belief in the young man's future. Today, Jimmy hopes that he hasn't exhausted his luck, his happy tickets. He filed an appeal and hopes for a successful review of the case. The appeal will take a lot of time, but Jimmy doesn't lose his optimism, although there is a high likelihood that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. However, who knows? Maybe luck will smile on him again. The Joey family remembers their son every day. Previously, they would talk on the phone with their father every day, but now he visits his son's grave daily. Pete can be considered the true hero of this story. If not for his resourcefulness and quick action, the case would never have been solved. If it had been some kid from California who called his parents once a week, the man reflects. A week goes by, surveillance camera footage is gone, the trash has been taken out, and that would have been the end of it for these guys. They would have gotten away with this crime. In 1994, in the small town of New Haven in the state of New York, 18-year-old Heidi Allen was abducted from the store where she worked. Two brothers were accused of her kidnapping, but two separate trials led to paradoxical outcomes. All charges were dropped against one brother, while the other was found guilty. However, if you thought, well, at least they caught the guy who did it, by the end of this story, you'll likely change your opinion. On April 3, 1994, Easter Sunday, 18-year-old Heidi Allen began her shift at the convenience store attached to the D&W gas station in New Haven, a town in Oswego County, New York. Heidi was a determined and energetic young woman with ambitions of building a career in education or psychological counseling. Devoting much of her time to sports, her tall and robust build made her an invaluable member of volleyball and other teams. Despite her athletic prowess, she maintained a friendly demeanor, and everyone noted her warmth and responsiveness. Heidi had been working at D&W for over 2 years. It was her day off, but she agreed to cover a shift so that her colleague could spend the day with her children. Heidi's shift began at 5:45, and she arrived at work with her boyfriend. This was not unusual, as he often accompanied her to ensure she felt safe while opening the store very early in the morning. Typically, he would wait until the first customers arrived and then go about his day. That's exactly how it played out on April 3rd. Another customer entered the store but didn't see any staff. It might have seemed like the store was closed, but the gas pumps were operational and the lights were on inside. The customer went outside and flagged down a passing patrol car. Sheriff's deputies entered the store, finding everything seemingly in order. There was money in the cash register, and $9.50 was on the counter, left by another customer as payment for fuel and a newspaper. There were no signs of struggle or apparent issues. A security alarm was located under the counter, but it hadn't triggered that day. The officers discovered Heidi's car parked on the street, and her purse and car keys were still in the store. Despite the absence of signs of a struggle, the sheriff's deputies concluded that she might have been abducted, and the search for her began immediately. The state police offered assistance to the sheriff's office in Oswego County with the search for the missing girl. They had the resources to block all exits and ensure the abductor wouldn't escape. However, the sheriff inexplicably declined the offer, stating that his team could handle it on their own. Officers checked the punched receipts at the store's cash register and discovered that the last purchase was made at 7:42 when someone bought 2 packs of cigarettes. It was crucial to find this customer, as they were the last person to see the girl at work. Fortunately, the search for this individual didn't take much time. As soon as the news of Heidi's presumed abduction spread through the town, a man named Richard Thibodeau called the police. He claimed to be the one who was in the store that morning. The girl sold him cigarettes, and he left afterward. When extensive searches for the girl began, local residents, including Richard Thibodeau, his brother Gary, and his wife Teresa, joined in. Around the same time, Christopher Bivens contacted the police, describing how he drove past the store and saw 2 men leading a tall young woman toward a van. He thought one of the men was holding the woman tightly. He admitted he didn't remember the appearance of the van or the men, but noted that they were quite tall. Despite Richard Thibodeau voluntarily contacting the police and assisting in the search for the girl, law enforcement grew suspicious of him due to the timing of his purchase, just minutes before the concerned customer approached the sheriff's deputies. Additionally, he drove a van similar to the one described by Christopher. The police searched Richard's van, but nothing connecting the vehicle or its owner to Heidi was found. Richard willingly provided his fingerprints, blood samples, and hair without objection. Due to suspicions surrounding Richard, investigators turned a closer eye to his brother, Gary Thibodeau. After all, Christopher Bivens saw 2 men taking the young woman out of the store. Gary explained to detectives that he was still sleeping at home that early morning, and his girlfriend confirmed his alibi. A month later, the police charged Richard Thibodeau with the abduction. Gary was also taken into custody, albeit for a different minor offense unrelated to Heidi's disappearance. While he was in jail, law enforcement managed to build a case against the brothers. Suddenly, 2 inmates emerged. claiming that Gary had said Heidi was no more and she would never be found. Thus, detectives arrested a man who had voluntarily called the police and reported being in the store that morning. Despite no evidence against him, Richard willingly provided all the necessary samples and underwent a polygraph test. However, it seemed to have little significance. Richard and his brother Gary, a person with an alibi, were charged with first-degree kidnapping. A jury trial was conducted separately for Gary Thibodeau. During the trial, no concrete evidence or forensic testimony was presented, and Heidi was still missing. However, the prosecution was confident in their case. They called a witness who had seen two men with a girl near the store that morning, and jury members heard the statements of two inmates regarding Gary's alleged remarks about Heidi. Although the information provided by the two convicted individuals contradicted not only each other but also established facts at that time, they were allowed to testify in court. The jurors heard that Heidi disappeared within just 13 minutes between the last recorded cigarette sale and the arrival of sheriff's deputies at the store. During these 13 minutes, the witness saw two men leading the young woman to a car. He described the vehicle as a white van with two dark blue or black doors at the back and two doors of the same color on the right side, along with a wide 6-inch black stripe above the wheels. The same witness, Christopher Bivens, identified the van as the one driven by Richard. However, it's crucial to note the interesting evolution in the testimony of this key prosecution witness. Initially, he could hardly recall anything about the men or the van where Heidi was supposedly placed. Suddenly, he could remember minute details, and the height of the men decreased to match the Thibodeau brothers' heights. Another customer from the store was called to testify. He made a purchase at 7:41, just a minute before Richard bought 2 packs of cigarettes. The man explained that there was a running van in the parking lot, and he assumed it was Richard's. He saw Richard in the store and, for some reason, believed there were 2 men in the van. Essentially, his testimony merely confirmed that Richard Thibodeau was in the store, a fact that Richard did not deny. A 13-year-old girl also provided testimony, claiming to have seen Richard's van parked at Gary's house shortly after Heidi Allen's disappearance. The girl insisted she remembered this because it was Easter Sunday. She had just woken up and looked out the window to see the van. However, after the trial, she recanted her statements, admitting that it could have been a dream. This constituted the evidence presented by the sheriff's deputies. The prosecutors had no concrete evidence linking the Thibodeau brothers to the abduction, no motive for the crime, and no logical explanation for why Richard Thibodeau would buy cigarettes if he intended to abduct the girl. Why not simply pocket the cigarettes when he and his brother allegedly took Heidi out of the store? Despite all this, Gary Thibodeau was found guilty of first-degree kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 25 years before being eligible for parole. During Richard's trial, nearly all the same evidence was presented, except for the testimony of the 2 inmates. However, since a different judge presided over the case, and there were different jurors, the outcome of the trial turned out to be entirely different. All charges against Richard were dropped. Richard returned to his family, while Gary began serving his sentence in prison. Gradually, the case of Heidi Allen's abduction began to fade from memory until an unexpected turn occurred in February 2013. A woman named Tanya Priest called the police, claiming she needed to unburden her conscience. She recounted a conversation that took place in 2006 when she gave a ride to her friend Victoria West to the trailer home where she lived with her boyfriend James Steen. The couple invited her inside, and as they chatted about random topics, a news segment about Heidi aired on TV. The girls started discussing what might have happened to her when James suddenly said, "Do you really want to know?" and began his story. It was the last thing the girls expected to hear. Steen revealed that he, along with 2 friends, Roger Breckenridge and Michael Borer, had abducted Heidi that day, taking her out of the store and putting her into Michael Borer's van. Borer was waiting in the van, meaning that 2 men took the girl out of the store, just as witness Christopher Bivens had claimed. The men then drove Heidi to the trailer home of Breckenridge's girlfriend, Jennifer Westcott, on Rice Road in the town of Mexico, Oswego County. Steen added that they had long gotten rid of that van, but the body could still be found in a shed in the woods across from where the trailer had been located. When asked why they had committed such a grave act, Steen explained that Heidi was planning to report to the police their involvement in illegal drug trafficking. At first, the friends didn't believe Steen, thinking he wouldn't harm a fly. However, a few years later, When Steen killed his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend, who happened to be his cousin, out of jealousy, Tanya Priest was no longer sure that Steen was so harmless. Interestingly, the police initially hesitated to believe Tanya Priest's words, but she was determined not to give up, and the officers eventually yielded to her persistent requests to investigate this version. They assisted Tanya in secretly recording a phone conversation with Roger Breckenridge's ex-girlfriend, Jennifer Westcott. In the phone conversation, Westcott admitted knowing about what happened to Heidi Allen and went so far as to say that the men didn't bring the abducted girl into her trailer, but left her in the van. However, when sheriff's deputies questioned Jennifer and presented her with the recording, she evaded and claimed she just wanted to quickly end the conversation with Tanya, agreeing with everything she said. During a polygraph test, she lied about knowing who abducted Heidi Allen. Despite this information, law enforcement did not actively pursue the case. At this point, Tanya reached out to Gary Thibodeau's lawyer because by then, she was convinced of his innocence and wanted to help him secure his release. It's worth noting that the main problem in this case has always been the motive behind the crime. It's entirely unclear why the Thibodeau brothers would kidnap a girl they barely knew. Similarly, the motive for 3 men to take such a heavy burden upon themselves remains unclear. However, it turns out that such a motive could exist, and law enforcement authorities did not want the truth to come to light. Heidi Allen, an 18-year-old employee at the gas station convenience store, had been a police informant for 3 years. 3 years ago, the girl got into trouble when she was caught by the police during a party her sister wanted to attend. As she was a minor and had put a child who was with her in the car in a dangerous situation, Heidi faced significant problems. In exchange for dropping all charges, the 15-year-old girl made a deal and became a police informant. Although she was a confidential informant, her status was revealed by a bizarre accident. Before she disappeared, Heidi worked with a sheriff's assistant, Chris Van Patten, who accidentally dropped her informant card with a photo and the codename Julia Roberts near the store where she worked. The card was found by Heidi's colleague, Kristen Duell, who returned it to the police. Kristen claimed that she only told her mother about it, but even if the girl told the truth, it is unknown how long the card lay on the ground and how many bystanders could see it. Inmates who testified in court against Gary Thibodeau claimed that Heidi was worried about Gary because he was planning to involve her in illegal dealings with controlled substances. However, firstly, one of these inmates later recanted his statement. Secondly, Heidi's diary was found, where she detailed her life, and there was not a single mention of the Thibodeau brothers. Thirdly, the information that Heidi was, in fact, an informant, allows for the dismissal of these baseless insinuations. The newly revealed information provided an alternative theory about Heidi's abduction, especially considering that her status was compromised, and dangerous people could have learned that she worked for the police. Considering the new details, in 2014, after persistent demands from Gary's lawyers, searches were conducted in 2 cabins in the woods. One was literally opposite the place where Jennifer Westcott lived. Search dogs indicated the potential presence of remains near the cabin. Police found fresh shoe tracks at the site, and inside it was evident that someone had already dismantled the floorboards. However, the forensic examination conducted by the Bureau of Forensic Services did not detect any human remains. It's interesting that when Tanya Priest decided to share what she knew, numerous witnesses from the town immediately came forward, claiming to have heard James Steen, Michael Borer, and Roger Breckenridge boasting about Heidi's abduction. Some of these witnesses asserted that they had reported this to the police on multiple occasions. Even the key prosecution witness, Christopher Bivens, stated that Steen and Breckenridge looked much more like the individuals leading the girl out of the store. However, as he had never seen their photos before, he considered the Tibbet brothers as possible abductors. Around the same time, it was revealed that in 2004, Heidi's cousin, Melissa Searles, found an envelope in her mailbox containing a gold bracelet she had once gifted to Heidi. The envelope had no postage stamp, indicating that it wasn't sent through the mail, but was personally placed in the mailbox. Melissa claimed that she had not reported this discovery to the police for years because the entire family believed Heidi's abductor was already in prison, and there was no need to reopen the case. However, with the new abduction theory, she apparently felt compelled to share this information. In 2015, the appeal process regarding Gary's accusation began. The defense insisted on a new trial due to a wealth of newly revealed information. 52 witnesses, including 3 considered potential new suspects, testified. A key witness was a woman who drove past the D&W store around 6 a.m. on April 3, 1994. She reported seeing an old, rust-covered van with no black stripe down the middle, confirming that it wasn't Richard Thibodeau's van. The defense tried to argue that the 3 men kidnapped the girl, forcing her into Michael Bohr's van, and took her to a cabin in the woods because they feared she would report them to the police. The men, of course, denied everything, but Michael Bohr slipped up by mentioning seeing Heidi's informant card near the store. Furthermore, Bohr told law enforcement that he wasn't a cruel person, so he couldn't have committed such a crime. However, this was untrue. Michael Bohr had previously been accused of kidnapping a young girl, making him, unlike the Thibodeau brothers, capable of such a crime. What's intriguing is that he was obsessed with this case, collecting a whole box of materials related to Heidi's abduction. One entry in his notes was particularly intriguing. He wrote as if a psychic told him that Heidi hid the bracelet behind the car seat. She added that Heidi hid an item where she was held, and all her family members would recognize it. Despite the abundance of new information, Gary lost the appeal after a year of hearings, and he was denied the opportunity for a new trial. From 2015 to 2018, subsequent judicial decisions also prohibited presenting new evidence due to doubts about the reliability of witnesses and the lack of sufficient proof to substantiate the alleged confessions of the 3 men. None of the 3, James Stein, Michael Bohr, or Roger Breckenridge, were charged in connection with Heidi's disappearance. Perhaps if Gary's lawyers had known about another crucial lead, they might have persuaded the judge to allow a new trial. The prosecutor informed the defense that he had provided them with all case materials. However, on December 13, 1994, he explicitly prohibited copying documents from a specific folder for the defense attorneys. Inside were 2 letters from the globally renowned expert in determining truthfulness, Murray Myron. His services were often sought by FBI agents, and he was asked to speak with a witness who might be the one who saw Heidi after her abduction. The expert concluded that Brent Moore's account of specific events related to Heidi was truthful and accurate. He did witness her being transported in a van, and she found refuge in a garage on the Barlow property in the town of Scriba. Brent was only 3 years old at the time of Heidi's abduction, and the expert was invited to verify whether the boy was telling the truth about the events of that day. The expert talked to the child, analyzed his drawings, and believed him. He advised looking for Heidi where the boy indicated. Interestingly, Brent knew Heidi before the abduction. His mother mentioned that during the Christmas holidays, after a visit to Richard Mitten, the boy's father, Brent mentioned seeing Heidi and that she gave money to Richard. When shown a photo of Heidi, the boy immediately recognized her and called her by name. Additionally, he accurately described her car. Brent added that 3 friends of his father were involved in Heidi's abduction, and the boy's mother remembered a conversation with her ex-husband on Easter Sunday in 1994, the day Heidi disappeared. She recalled how Richard suddenly claimed that 3 boys had kidnapped her. Who they were and whether they knew that Heidi was an informant is unknown. Investigators attempted to search the garage indicated by the boy, but couldn't conduct the search on either the garage or the adjacent area due to the lack of a warrant, and the homeowner did not allow the search. As evident, there are several theories about what might have happened to Heidi Allen besides the police's version implicating the Tibbetts brothers. It's possible that Stein, Breckenridge, and Bohr were the kidnappers, or perhaps friends of Brent Moore's father were involved. Since the girl was not found, there's also a more optimistic version suggesting that she entered a witness protection program. What if the police realized the danger they put Heidi in by making a teenager a confidential informant and then compromising her status? This could explain many unexplained aspects of the case. The appearance of her bracelet, the lack of signs of struggle in the store, the absence of evidence clearly pointing to any of the suspects. One might want to believe that she had to leave her family, but no one kidnapped her, and she is enjoying life somewhere in this world. Although one thing can be asserted almost certainly, when the sheriff's assistant dropped Heidi's informant card, he put an end to the life she had led until the age of 18. What truly happened on the morning of Sunday, April 3, 1994, remains unknown. It's possible that we may never find out. What we do know is that Gary maintained his innocence until his last breath. Gary Thibodeau passed away on August 12, 2018. at the age of 64, and his health did not allow him to live the additional 2 years to a potential conditional early release. Gary's departure means he will no longer have a chance to clear his name. Hope for another appeal in federal court died with him. He will remain a convicted inmate who abducted an 18-year-old girl and, according to many, is the second victim of this terrible and convoluted crime. On November 6, 1994, Jan Balmain stands on the platform of Newcastle Railway Station, Australia. She cranes her neck, trying to catch sight of the approaching train. Jan eagerly awaits the arrival of her 22-year-old daughter, Revelle, who boarded the train to Sydney. The journey takes just 2 hours. A mother waits, anticipating her daughter, an extraordinarily beautiful blonde with blue eyes, tall and slender, to flutter onto the platform and embrace her. Revelle Balmain lives in the prestigious Sydney suburb of Bellevue Hill, not far from the city center. She is a model and a dancer. She had planned to visit her parents before a work trip to Japan, where her troupe awaited her for their 4th tour. But there is much that Jan doesn't know about her daughter, and on this November day, Revelle does not disembark in Newcastle. Traces of her short life are scattered across Sydney's streets, including items intended to accompany her to Japan, a journey she will never make. 22-year-old Revelle Balmain was close to realizing her dream. As a professional dancer, she had already visited Japan on 3 concert tours and eagerly anticipated her 4th trip. She supplemented her income by modeling, appearing in magazine spreads and product advertisements. Just a few days later, a new issue of a popular Australian magazine featuring Revelle on the cover was scheduled for release, an esteemed accomplishment for a model. Additionally, 4 weeks ago, Revelle met a promising 27-year-old director named Piers Fisher-Pollard. Young, beautiful, and talented, Revelle had high expectations for life, and it seemed like her entire life lay ahead of her. Revelle started dancing at the age of 3. She adored music, jazz, and tap dancing. During her teenage years, she spent a year in a theater school in Britain. However, upon returning from her first concert tour, she realized that performing on stage was her true calling. Unfortunately, it didn't pay as well as she'd hoped, so she juggled dancing with modeling jobs. But even that wasn't enough to cover her bills. Therefore, she decided to improve her financial situation by offering her services to an escort agency. Many girls work in this field for a very short time, facing difficulties, and she was one of them. Much later, Revelle's mother would state that her daughter's decision shocked her family. She had grown up in a loving family, always supportive of their children, and if financial troubles arose, she could have turned to them. The woman speculated that the deeply hidden reason for this decision might have been related to an incident when Revelle was 4 years old and found her 1.5-year-old brother Matthew floating in the pool. He couldn't be saved, and it was very difficult for her parents to recover from this. Perhaps Revelle never managed to overcome it. Nevertheless, in November 1994, Revelle's boyfriend, family, and most of her friends had no idea about her side job. Saturday, November 5th, 1994, was supposed to be her last day working in escort services. At some point, her life took a turn, but after 6 weeks of leading a double life, she was returning to her true love and passion, dance. The day before, she had lunch with her friend Kate Brentnall, who described her as happier than she had ever been. She was very excited about her trip to Japan. Revelle had dyed her hair to a softer, more natural blonde. I thought it was symbolic. I thought she had never looked more beautiful. Sadly, that journey would never take place, because the next evening she disappeared under highly suspicious circumstances. Revelle spent Saturday morning with Piers. In the short time they had been dating, they had become inseparable. However, suddenly Piers developed an intense headache, forcing them to go to the hospital. After seeing the doctor, Revelle suggested having lunch, but Piers declined due to his migraine. Around noon, he escorted her to a bus stop. Revelle headed to the city center while Piers preferred to lie down. At that time, Revelle was working for 2 different escort agencies. One of them was managed by Jane Stanojevic and Zoran Stanojevic. As her boyfriend, Piers, couldn't spend time with her, Revelle called Jane and Zoran's escort agency to inform them that she was available. The administrator replied that she had a 2-hour booking from 4 p.m. It was for a new client, a young man named Gavin Samer, who lived in the eastern suburb of Sydney called Kingsford. Later at 10 p.m., she had another appointment with friends of Zoran from Serbia. Zoran was eager to please his friends and suggested having her accompany them to the hotel because he wanted to offer them the most beautiful girl. Revelle arrived at Gavin Sammer's house with a bottle of champagne as requested by Gavin. She was wearing cork wedge shoes, a long skirt, and a tunic. She had a pager. During that time, there were no mobile phones, so escort agencies handed pagers to the girls, sending them messages as new orders came in. At 3:50 p.m., Revelle used Gavin's phone to call the administrator and let them know she had arrived. This was a way for the girl to signal that she felt comfortable at the client's house and that everything was fine. 2 hours later, at 5:50 p.m., she called the administrator again and said the meeting was over and she was leaving, but there was no need to send a driver for her. However, as Gavin later revealed, she didn't leave, but instead arranged to spend an extra hour with him for additional payment. This was a risky practice because the owners of the escort agencies did not approve and sometimes punished the girls for such side jobs, naturally because they didn't receive their share of the profit. While she was with Gavin, her boyfriend Pierce messaged her, feeling much better. She told him she lay down to rest. Pierce easily believed this as he had no suspicion about her side job. At 7 p.m., she received a message on her pager from her friend Kate Brittle. 15 minutes later, Revelle called back and let her friend know she couldn't talk, but would call from home in an hour after changing. And then they would have a couple of beers together at the Royal Hotel, a popular pub in Sydney. Afterward, she planned to meet Pierce. The sun set that day at 7:25 p.m., according to Gavin. That was the last time he saw Revelle when he dropped her off at the nearest pub, the Tomato Inn. He pulled up to the pub, she got out of the car, said goodbye, and entered through the back door. Gavin then went to a store for cigarettes and cider before heading home, watching TV, and going to bed. At 7:53 p.m., Revelle's boyfriend Pierce sent her another message on her pager, but she didn't reply. By this time, Pierce had met their mutual friend Zoe. They were visiting different bars in the city, and Pierce constantly messaged Revelle on her pager so she'd know where to find them. The last time he attempted to contact her was at 2:30 a.m. Then he went home to sleep. She didn't respond to any of his messages. On the following day, November 6th, Revelle's mother, Jen Balmain, stood on the railway platform in Newcastle, awaiting the arrival of the train from Sydney, on which her daughter was supposed to arrive. Revelle's parents were eagerly anticipating their daughter's arrival to have a sort of farewell celebratory dinner, to catch up, chat, share the latest news before she was due to embark on a 2-week rehearsal in Brisbane, followed by her troupe's upcoming 4-month tour in Japan. The train arrived, but Revelle wasn't on it. Jen assumed that her daughter might have missed the early morning train and waited for the next one. However, Revelle still didn't appear. As time passed, Jen realized that something was amiss. She returned home and immediately made phone calls. She contacted her daughter's friend, the apartment neighbor, and hospitals in Sydney, trying to ascertain her whereabouts. When Revelle's apartment neighbor informed Jen that Revelle's room still had an almost fully packed suitcase with her belongings, passport, and ticket to Japan, Jen realized it was time to involve the police. Jen, along with Revelle's apartment neighbor and her boyfriend Pierce, reported Revelle missing. However, the police were not swift in commencing an investigation, despite the discovery of Revelle's belongings scattered throughout the Kingsford area, where her last client, Gavin Seymour, resided. Her bag, cosmetics, diary, credit cards, and keys to the Bellevue Hill apartment were found strewn across different streets. One of her high heels was found in a trash bin, while the other was discovered in a nearby block. The plastic casing of her pager was lying in a gutter. On the 5th day after the girl's disappearance, when everything indicated an unfortunate event involving Revelle, the police started their investigation. Initially, they explored the version that Revelle was abducted on the streets of Kingsford, with the abductor throwing her belongings out of the car window while driving. Wild rumors circulated, suggesting she might have been abducted at the request of an Arabian prince and taken to Saudi Arabia. However, the police attempted to investigate more realistic scenarios. Pierce was the first to be excluded from the list of suspects. Investigators considered the possibility that he might have learned about the girl's double life and became so furious that he killed Revelle. However, when informed about her side jobs, it was a double blow for the young man. He had an alibi for the evening of her disappearance, and apart from her family, a few friends, and her roommate, he was one of the few people who insisted on continuing the investigation, demanding a more serious approach to the case. Next in line as a suspect was Gavin. Several suspicious moments arose in his story. He recounted that on that Saturday, when he decided to engage the services of the escort agency, his girlfriend, Michelle, had left home to visit her family. He hired Revelle and paid her $500 for 3 hours. To pay Revelle, he pawned Michelle's clarinet and received $250 for it. Additionally, he won $150 at slot machines in the Tomato Inn pub. This summed up to $400. He paid this in cash and another $100 to Revelle by check. However, the pub staff couldn't recall cashing out his winnings, and he allegedly lost his family's checkbook. Even in the store where he bought cigarettes and cider, there were no records corresponding to the man's claims. His girlfriend Michelle was, of course, questioned. She flew from Brisbane to Sydney 2 days after Revelle's disappearance. Gavin met her at the airport, and she immediately noticed scratches on Gavin's chest and neck. There was also a mark on his finger, as if from a bite. The police also noticed these wounds, but Gavin couldn't explain where they came from, whether from surfing activities or gardening. Michelle also pointed out that Gavin cleaned his car and folded the rear seats, although she added that he often turned the car into a mess, then cleaned it to accommodate his surfboard. Additionally, her incredibly lazy boyfriend laundered the bedding and hung it out to dry just before her arrival. She found it suspicious, but it likely indicated his attempt to hide infidelity rather than criminal activity. Unfortunately, due to the lack of evidence, the police couldn't even conclusively prove that a crime had occurred. The Revelle parents were determined to seek justice for their daughter, but no one was arrested or charged with anything. A member of the Revelle family claimed that the police considered Revelle's life less valuable because she was promiscuous. Hence, they half-heartedly conducted the investigation. Gavin's house was searched not immediately after the girl's disappearance, and even then, it was done without a warrant. It was more of a cursory inspection. Gavin's car was checked for DNA and other evidence only after 10 days. Many crucial witnesses were not interviewed and evidence was not gathered. Naturally, the investigation stalled, and there were no developments in it for several years. Only in 1999, after an active campaign by the public, media, and the girl's relatives, did interest in the case resurface, and it was reviewed by the coroner. The detective who led the initial investigation told the coroner that, in the police's opinion, Gavin was the prime suspect in the case. Even Gavin's lawyer, Seymour, was forced to agree that his client was the sole suspect. Gavin worked for the girl's parents' company and at the time was an attractive, successful young man. Additionally, he was quite athletic as he loved surfing. Gavin lived with his girlfriend, Michelle, but when she went to visit her family, he decided to hire an escort. Gavin was the last person seen with Revelle. According to him, she spent an additional hour with him before he dropped her off at the Red Tomato Inn, a pub in Kingsford. He parked his car in the back. Revelle exited the car, said goodbye, and walked inside through the back door. He then went to a store and headed home. However, nobody at the pub who was present at that time could recall seeing Revelle. The owner explicitly stated that they had a different crowd that evening, and if such a girl had entered the pub, everyone would have noticed. Despite Gavin purchasing cider at the store, no one remembered this. In other words, after Revelle's last call to her friend from Gavin's house at 7:15 p.m., nothing from Gavin's account was officially confirmed. Moreover, Michelle, now his ex-girlfriend, told the coroner in 1999 that she called Gavin that evening but got no answer. After several attempts, she finally got through at 9:22 p.m. and he sounded agitated. His other ex-girlfriend, who had been involved with him before, stated that after drinking, he could become aggressive and hit her in the face. This raised suspicions further, especially because Gavin had been drinking on Saturday throughout the day and had at least consumed half a bottle of champagne brought by Revelle. However, one witness, a young man named Jeremy Coughlin, offered a completely different scenario of what might have happened to Revelle. Jeremy was a friend of one of Revelle's wealthiest clients, Mark Colton. Jeremy recounted that he and Mark were at a party when, after a few drinks, Mark abruptly said, "Aren't people stupid? Have you heard about Revelle, Balmain? First, there were rumors about an Arab prince who took her to Saudi Arabia. Nonsense. She's at a depth of 3 meters, and nobody will find her body. That's what you get for deceiving the brothel you work for. The brothel owner wanted her dead because she was damaging his business." Jeremy asked his friend about Mark's relationship with Revelle, and he replied that he met her outside the brothel, paying her between $500 to $1,000 a week, which was cheaper than paying the agency $200 per hour. When Mark Colton was questioned, he denied saying anything like that, but he indeed had heard rumors that agencies were threatening employees who saw clients privately. Owners of the agency were also questioned. It turned out that on Revelle's last day working at the escort agency, she owed Jane and Zoran money, around $300. However, as explained by Jane, this wasn't considered unusual. While most clients pay with credit cards, some prefer cash, and at the end of each week, the girls in the agency reconcile who owes what to whom. According to Jane, Revelle was planning to repay the money owing to a meeting with Zoran's friends scheduled for 10 p.m. However, Zoran claimed he was unaware of such an agreement. In fact, his words contradicted those of his wife on almost every point. Jane described that on the day the girl disappeared, she and Zoran bought a television, had pizza at a pizzeria around 5 p.m., and went home. She didn't work that night because she was heavily pregnant and tired. However, Zoran told the police he didn't work on the evening of the girl's disappearance, literally saying, "No, not on Saturday." He claimed he took the TV to the office, installed it, and returned home around 7 p.m. Yet, 4 years later, during the coroner's inquest, he stated that by saying, "No, not on Saturday," he meant not during the day on Saturday. In reality, he did work that evening and returned home around 2 a.m. He blamed the misunderstanding on the translator. However, later, a linguistic expert confirmed that the original statements of the man were translated correctly. Regardless, Zoran claimed he did not see Revelle that night. As the agency's driver, he picked up another girl, Kelly, at 7:15 p.m. He took her to meet his friends at Royal Hotel Park in Darling Harbor, where he waited for 2 hours before driving her to another appointment at the Sheraton Airport Hotel. When he was taking the girl home, he had a flat tire, which he had to fix himself. For 4 years following the girl's disappearance and before the case was considered by the coroner, the police did not interview either Zoran's Serbian friends, who had long since left for Belgrade, or Kelly, Revelle's colleague, who provided Zoran's alibi. Partly this was because when Jane Stanojevic gave her initial statement in 1994, she said that Revelle was supposed to meet the Serbians at the Swiss Grand Hotel in Bondi. After 4 years, she claimed she had made a mistake and actually meant the Park Royal Hotel in Darling Harbor. It wasn't until 1999 that the police checked the registration records of both hotels, finding no information about the Serbians in either. Only after Zoran's testimony did the police locate Kelly, who reluctantly corroborated his words. However, when the police checked the Sheraton Hotel records, they couldn't find evidence of Kelly or her client being there. Gavin Seymour, the lawyer, was puzzled as to why the girl was miraculously found only now, why she wasn't questioned 4 years ago, and why the police didn't investigate inconsistencies between Zoran's and his wife's statements, which couldn't even agree on whether he was working on November 5th, 1994. In response to all these questions, the chief investigator who led the initial investigation said that he didn't know. The Revelle family was deeply upset by what they heard during the coroner's inquest. The police failed to interview many crucial witnesses, and other witnesses, of course, had long forgotten what they had seen over such a period of time. Their lawyer stated that the girl's parents were treated as a nuisance, despite their only desire being to know what happened to their daughter. Didn't they deserve that? Even the coroner was forced to agree that the initial investigation wasn't as thorough as it should have been. After examining the case, the coroner dismissed the theory that Revelle staged her own disappearance because there was no evidence to support it. After all, if she wanted to disappear, the timing was extremely inconvenient. She was already planning an extended trip to Japan and would have returned to pursue her career as a model and dancer with renewed vigor, making her short stint as a call girl forgettable. Additionally, her personal life seemed perfect. She and Piers were crazy about each other, and there was nothing indicating that she wanted to run away. On May 28, 1999, the coroner ruled that Revelle was murdered on November 5, 1994, by an unknown person or persons. He noted that there wasn't sufficient evidence against the police's main suspect, Gavin Seymour. However, if his name had been hidden from the public eye until then, now everyone knew who was considered the prime suspect in the case. Before the coroner ruled that Revelle was murdered, the police had no body or evidence to work with. It was only in 2008 that detectives from the cold case unit sent forensic experts to Gavin's house, due to advancements in technology. Subsequently, detectives went to Tasmania to question Gavin, but he refused to provide DNA. Gavin, once a successful young man, moved to Tasmania and worked as a chef due to being essentially accused without trial of Revelle's murder. He led a very secluded life, drank heavily, and hardly interacted with locals. After spending 15 years there, he returned to Sydney in 2018. He only spoke to a journalist once, explaining that the case had cost him job opportunities and felt as though he was punished without being proven guilty. He knew people considered him guilty, but he claimed innocence. In reality, he was more preoccupied with how the case affected him than Revelle and her loved ones. However, he stated he didn't kill Revelle. He was only guilty of hiring a call girl that day. Revelle's parents passed away without receiving answers about their daughter. What happened to her? Who killed her and why? Her sister still hopes the case will progress. Over the years, she searched for her sister's body. Now, she seeks answers. She needs to know who killed Revelle. It seems her prayers were answered because in 2021, a new phase of the investigation began. The police announced a reward of $1 million for information leading to Revelle's killer's arrest. Additionally, Jane King, former owner of the escort agency and Zoran's ex-wife, made an incredible statement. She said she never thought Gavin Seymour could be involved in Revelle's disappearance. However, she now had new evidence supporting Gavin's truth, evidence that would help clear his name, but was not found by the police conducting the initial investigation. Essentially, his whereabouts that evening were confirmed. That's all she could disclose at the moment. This new information turned the investigation upside down. In fact, a series of new facts were discovered in the case, crucial enough to be presented to the coroner in February next year. Yes, it took almost 30 years, but the police identified clear contradictions that shifted the entire focus of the investigation. While old evidence still needs testing with new technologies, the new investigation is focused on Jane's ex-husband Zoran and his constantly changing story. He was one of the main drivers for the company, transporting girls to clients. However, there were always discrepancies in the statements he gave to the police. During the initial interrogation, 10 days after Revelle's disappearance, he claimed he wasn't working that night, but was at home with his wife. In 1999, he admitted to being at work, but his new version of events still didn't align because the evidence crucial to his alibi was not found. Revelle was supposed to meet Zoran's Serbian friends at 10 p.m., but for some reason, the police never questioned them. Incredibly, in 2021, an anonymous call was made to an organization called Crime Stoppers regarding this man, in the photo, who could be involved in the crime. This likely refers to Bojan Prevolovic, Zoran's friend and Revelle's last presumed client. While Jane King never met her husband's friend, she now knows that Zoran arranged something for him the day after the girl's disappearance. He bought a ticket from Australia to Thailand. Essentially, the man Revelle was supposed to meet that evening left the country the very next day after her disappearance, and no one bothered to inquire about the reason for such haste or coincidence. In December 2021, a raid was conducted on Zoran's property, revealing cannabis worth $400,000 and exclusive items valued at $150,000. He faced 36 charges and was denied bail. Most importantly, according to the police, the raids were carried out based on information obtained during the new investigation into Revelle Balmain's disappearance and presumed murder. A detective explicitly stated they were investigating Zoran's involvement in the crime. However, if Zoran's behavior appears unusual, no less suspicious are the actions of Jane King herself. On the day Revelle disappeared, she and Zoran had lunch at a pizza place. The next morning, upon learning that Revelle wasn't answering calls or messages, Jane immediately dialed the pizza place's number. A staff member recalls her being in a panic, as if it were crucial for her to secure an alibi. She allegedly said to the staff member, "The police are investigating a murder. Can you confirm that we were at your restaurant?" Jane denies phrasing it this way. She insists she said disappearance. But regardless of whether she said murder or disappearance, why was she in such a hurry to confirm her alibi on the very day Revelle, a grown 22-year-old woman, had disappeared just a few hours ago? Where did this rush come from? Why was she so certain that Revelle simply missed her last evening order, given that such occurrences had been noted before? Jane King herself hadn't even called the police at that point. Likely, nobody had yet contacted the police, and certainly, nobody was conducting an investigation. It seems she was certain that she would be asked where she was that day. One can't help but suspect that Jane and Zoran know more than they want to reveal. At the very least, people who definitely knew where Revelle was that evening, apart from her last client, were the escort agency administrator, Jane King, and Zoran Stanovich. The new police investigation leading to the second coroner's inquest, planned for early next year, is in defiance of the apparent difficulties posed by the time elapsed since Revelle Balmain's disappearance. However, it currently promises the greatest hope that this dreadful case will be solved. Today, detectives are closer than ever to capturing her killer. Let's transport ourselves to the picturesque and idyllic beaches of Thailand, more precisely to the island of Koh Tao. Koh Tao translates to Turtle Island, and although it's not as large as its neighboring islands, Koh Samui, where the international airport is located, and Koh Phangan, known for its full moon beach parties, Koh Tao has earned its own reputation over the years, primarily due to its magnificent underwater world that attracts scuba diving and snorkeling enthusiasts, as well as its constant parties. However, like in many other places blessed with natural beauty, Koh Tao has a dark side. Alongside the lively entertainment and tourists come illegal substances and organized crime. Petty thefts from tourists have become commonplace, although they are not unique to such exotic locations. However, in the latter half of 2014, the island gained a truly chilling notoriety as the Island of Death, from which it has yet to recover. Like other vacationers, Hannah Witheridge and David Miller arrived on Koh Tao in search of adventure in late August 2014. Hannah, a 23-year-old student from the British village of Hensby, wanted to relax before starting her master's degree in speech therapy. She believed that Thailand would be the perfect place for it. Her family tried to dissuade her from the trip, but Hannah suddenly booked the tickets and declared that she would go after all. She arrived on the island in the company of 3 friends and kept in constant contact with her family, who were worried about her safety. David lived on the small island of Jersey, located between Britain and France. The 24-year-old engineering student was about to begin an internship at a mining company, and also decided to relax before his final push in his studies. He came to Koh Tao with 2 close friends. Hannah and David were not acquainted before visiting the island, but they quickly became friends when they stayed at a small hotel just a few steps from Sairi Beach. The students were enjoying what the exotic island had to offer: the opportunity to see a reef shark or a manta ray while diving, or to admire the breathtaking views from the viewpoint. And if they wished to relax and unwind, there were plenty of restaurants and bars right on the beach. On September 14, 2014, around 7 o'clock, Hannah and David, along with their friends, were at a beachside bar. After midnight, Hannah and her 3 friends entered another bar on the beach. Surveillance cameras captured David going into a supermarket and walking the streets, and by 2 o'clock in the morning, he joined Hannah. After 2:15, Hannah and David left the bar together, taking a romantic stroll along the beach, unable to resist the allure of the ocean. The young couple was just a few meters away from the safety of their hotel. Soon after sunrise, the hotel owner was awakened by one of his beach cleaning staff. He followed her to Sairi Beach, where a horrifying scene awaited him. Blood had mixed with the sand. What caught his eye first was Hannah's body. The young woman was partially undressed, brutally beaten, and likely a victim of violence. 2 meters away from her in the water was another body, David. His head showed severe injuries, but it would later be revealed that he had died from drowning. Near the bodies lay clothing soaked in blood, along with 2 presumed murder weapons, a bloodied garden hoe and a wooden bat. The news of the crime quickly spread across Koh Tao. For an island with only 6 police officers, it was a serious challenge. The officers couldn't even properly secure the crime scene, and onlookers managed to take numerous photos of the bodies, which later ended up on the internet and even came to the attention of the victims' relatives. The way the police initially handled the case could have embarrassed Thailand on the world stage, so an officer was sent from the main headquarters to oversee the work of the local police. He promptly offered his apologies to the victims' parents. Despite the difficulties in launching the investigation, the police focused on the evidence: cigarette butts, the murder weapons, and the bodies of Hannah and David. They found DNA from 2 men. It became evident almost immediately that the course of the investigation would be heavily influenced by one crucial force: the desire to protect Thailand's tourism industry at all costs. Fearing that the murders could impact the number of tourists coming to the country, the authorities exerted immense pressure on the police to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. This also meant shifting suspicions as far away from Thailand as possible, even though investigators had barely begun their work. As a result, the investigation focused on those who had traveled to Thailand with Hannah and David, as well as migrants, essentially ignoring the local population. A police representative justified this blatant bias by simply stating that Thais wouldn't commit such acts. From the very beginning, other problems emerged. Although the police announced that checkpoints had been established to prevent anyone from leaving the island, a potential suspect had already managed to flee. Christopher Allen Ware was a close friend of David's, and the two had stayed together in an ocean view bungalow. The police hinted at a crime of passion. Christopher came under suspicion due to wounds on his hand and the fact that his bloodied pants were found in David's suitcase. 2 days later, Christopher was arrested at the airport along with his brother James, but suspicions were quickly dropped. Because of the two murder weapons, the police concluded that there were two perpetrators, and James, a possible accomplice to Christopher, if there even was one, had left the island before the murders occurred. The police later added that the DNA found on the cigarette butts on the beach did not match Christopher's DNA. With no viable suspects, the police once again turned their attention to migrants from Myanmar, comparing the DNA found at the crime scene with hundreds of individuals and conducting interviews with many others. Rumors began to circulate about the police mistreating migrants during interrogations, including threats and scalding with hot water. This wasn't the last time such allegations would arise during the investigation. Additionally, the police obtained surveillance footage from numerous bars and restaurants near the crime scene. However, many of the cameras were not operational at the time. The existing footage did not provide all the necessary information to the police. Later, suspicions arose that the police simply did not receive all the videos that could have filled important gaps, including the pier from which the perpetrators could have escaped on a boat. Nevertheless, the police focused on Burmese nationals, and within just 2 weeks of the investigation, a turning point occurred in the case. Officers identified 3 young men who were near the crime scene and caught on camera. These young men were named Monmon, Zo Leng, and Y Pio. They admitted to being on the beach on the night of the murders. Monmon was released as he could prove his legal presence in the country. However, 22-year-olds Zo and Y were detained as illegal migrants. Exactly 1 day after their detention, the young men confessed to the murder of Hannah and David. Investigators were confident that they had found the killers due to 2 crucial pieces of evidence. First, their DNA perfectly matched the DNA samples found at the crime scene and on Hannah's body. Second, detectives believed they could prove the theft of David's phone by Y Fio. He claimed he had simply found it on the beach and intended to sell it to make some money. However, Thai police contacted the British police, National Crime Agency, and using the phone's serial number, confirmed that it belonged to David. Following their confession, a shocking and unconventional reenactment of the crime followed, in which the men publicly demonstrated to the media what they allegedly did to the victims and asked for forgiveness. Despite this, for a moment, it seemed like the case was closed. The men stated that they had been drinking on the beach on the night of the murders and purportedly confessed to the police that their main target was the girl. However, things soon became much more complicated. Firstly, the men had never had any prior issues with the law. As soon as they were allowed to speak with a representative from their home country's embassy, they retracted their confessions. Zo Leng and Y Fio claimed that their confessions had been coerced. They alleged that they were beaten, left naked in a cold room, threatened with electric shocks, and hinted that they could be killed if they didn't confess. They were also told that if they confessed, 2 years in prison. The interrogation was conducted in the presence of a single translator who happened to work as a shopkeeper on the island. Other compelling evidence that, according to investigators, they had against the men soon came under close scrutiny. At the center of these disputes were DNA samples. While the police claimed that they had taken several samples for testing from Hannah's body, the murder weapons and cigarette butts found nearby, it was no longer a secret to anyone that the police had poorly secured the crime scene. Officers simply didn't know how to properly handle a crime scene, allowing tourists, journalists, and onlookers to roam the beach for days after the murders had occurred. The claim that Zo Leng had stolen David's phone also seemed suspicious because officers had previously admitted that the phone had been given to them by David's friend. Nonetheless, the trial of the accused began in July 2015. The 18 days of the trial stretched over several weeks, and revealed even more problems. Firstly, the defense was not given additional time to prepare for the trial and was only allowed a brief meeting with their clients before the trial began. It was only during the trial that they gained access to the 900-page police report, which was filled with unclear and contradictory information. Key evidence contained errors, such as the initial DNA analysis report having the wrong date and consisting of handwritten parts that were partially crossed out. Clearly, this became such an issue that even the prosecutors publicly demanded corrections to the documents. Moreover, many potential witnesses who could have provided alibis for the accused or come forward with additional information refused to do so, fearing persecution by the authorities. This was especially true for migrants who were already in a vulnerable position because the majority of them were in the country illegally. On July 10th, it seemed that the defense had achieved a small victory when the court ordered a retesting of DNA evidence in the case. Amidst allegations of possible contamination of the samples, a claim supported by the country's chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Pornthip Rojanasunand, who had not been allowed to participate in the original investigation. However, it quickly became apparent that key DNA samples had been completely depleted during the initial analysis, particularly the DNA from Hannah and David's bodies. DNA from the murder weapons was available, and according to the police, still linked the accused to the crime. But when the country's chief forensic pathologist was allowed to conduct tests himself, he stated that he had found DNA from another man, but it did not match any of the accused. Additionally, at least one witness claimed that the hoe and wooden stick had been cleaned after they were found. The defense consulted with renowned Australian forensic scientist Jane Taupin, who found the speed at which the Thai police collected and analyzed DNA samples to be unusual, especially considering that one sample contained the DNA of multiple individuals, including the victims. The police claimed that they were able to isolate and analyze the samples in less than 12 hours. Jane indicated to the lawyers that this was highly unusual and suspicious for the complex analysis of this kind. Given that several forms of these tests contained errors and some parts were rewritten, Jane subtly suggested that either the tests were conducted incorrectly or they were simply fraudulent. Overall, it seemed that the defense would have no trouble dismantling the case of the prosecution. However, they made two strange decisions. Firstly, they did not request Jane Taupin to testify in court, even though Jane insisted that her testimony would be crucial in shedding light on the problems with the DNA analysis. It is unclear why the defense did not want Jane to testify, but most likely, the lawyers feared that the testimony of a foreign expert would bias the judges against their clients. In addition to this, the defense only mentioned the DNA evidence in their closing statements along with other information, while the prosecutors made DNA matching a central part of the trial and constantly reminded the judges of it. This decision ultimately determined the outcome of the case. In late December 2015, the accused were found guilty and sentenced to the maximum penalty. In 2016 and 2017, the appeals were unsuccessful, and in 2019, the final verdict was delivered when Thailand's Supreme Court upheld the sentence, emphasizing that the evidence against the convicted individuals was clear, reliable, and detailed. In August 2020, in honor of the king's birthday and as a sign of his leniency, the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Following the verdict, protests took place in Myanmar, and various human rights organizations called for an investigation into numerous allegations against the Thai police. British media dubbed Koh Tao the Death Island. However, this bad publicity did not lead to any significant consequences as the two men remained in prison. Although the number of tourists slightly decreased immediately after the murders, it did not have a long-term impact on Thailand's tourism. Nevertheless, this did not quell the wave of outrage from the international community, which believed that the Burmese migrants had been made scapegoats from the beginning. An authoritative publication even wrote that nobody really believed that they had killed the British tourists. Online activists from Anonymous hacked the Thai police website and released a controversial video accusing the police of framing the young men. The video received support from an unexpected source, Hannah's sister. Laura posted a furious message on Facebook criticizing Thailand. If the guys didn't kill Hannah and David, then who did? The most popular theory is the involvement of the Koh Tao Mafia. This theory emerged shortly after the murders when a 25-year-old street musician named Sean McCanna posted on Facebook that he knew who committed the murders. Sean claimed to have seen two local residents harassing Hannah on the night before the killings, and David came to her rescue. Sean took a photo of the Thai men and posted it online, allegedly receiving threats as a result. Sean fled the island, claiming that the local mafia wanted to kill him. In reality, when referring to the mafia on the island, people often mean influential families rather than organized crime groups. One particular family was frequently associated with the case, as they owned more cafes and restaurants on the beach than anyone else. The owner of the hotel where Hannah and David stayed also belonged to this family. This man played a significant role in the investigation and was even present on the beach when the police collected evidence. According to his account, he demanded an explanation for why Sean was seen covered in blood on the night of the murders. A week after the murders, in the presence of two police officers, he questioned Sean about the blood. Sean did not provide a clear answer, left the bar, and ran to a supermarket. The men followed him and asked why he had run away, claiming that no one had threatened him. For some time, the police considered Sean a suspect, but eventually allowed him to leave the island after he admitted that he had cut himself before the murders. Supporting the theory that the culprits belonged to an influential Thai family, and that's why they were protected by the police, is a police report stating that a member of the influential island family was considered a suspect. However, the police officer who recorded this information was transferred, and there was no further mention of the family. It's possible that this theory contains some truth, but the actual truth may lie elsewhere. We simply don't know. What we can be sure of is the tragic loss of Hannah and David, two young people at the beginning of their independent lives who went on vacation to celebrate their academic achievements. Their lives were cut short at a time when they should have felt happier and more carefree than ever before. It's hard to imagine what both families went through, but Hannah's family had to endure it for the second time. In 2019, Hannah's sister Laura became seriously ill, and on September 16, 2019, exactly 5 years and 1 day after Hannah's death, Laura also passed away. Throughout the time that the guys continue to serve their sentences in prison, the number of tourists on Koh Tao who have died under unexplained circumstances continues to rise. Local police quickly close cases, classifying incidents as accidents or claiming that individuals wanted to end their own lives. In 2015, 23-year-old Christina Ansley mysteriously died in her bungalow, and the police closed the case without conducting toxicological tests or even talking to the last person who saw her alive in her bungalow. That same year, 25-year-old British national Nick Pearson died on Koh Tao. His body was found in the sea the day after he went missing. According to the police, he fell from a 15-meter cliff into the sea and drowned. However, his parents are convinced that this is physically impossible due to the location of the hotel. In 2015, 29-year-old Frenchman Dimitri Povse was found hanged in his bungalow. The police considered the case straightforward, despite the fact that the man's hands were tied behind his back, and there were lacerations on his body. In 2016, 26-year-old Luke Miller was found dead in a swimming pool. In 2017, 23-year-old Russian Valentina Novozhenova disappeared, leaving her passport, phone, money, and return ferry ticket in her room. That same year, 30-year-old Belgian tourist Elise Balmain died, and her body was found in the jungle. The police believed that the woman's death was her own decision, but the mystery surrounding her death became even more convoluted when it was revealed that Elise had gone to great lengths to conceal her true identity by staying at a hotel on Koh Tao.